My name is Sabrina Whitaker, and I was 32 years old the night my family finally said the quiet part out loud. We were all crowded around my grandfather's old dining table in Indiana, the same table where birthdays were celebrated, arguments were avoided, and uncomfortable truths were always politely ignored. The wood was scratched from decades of use. The chairs never matched. It smelled like pot roast and familiarity. Everything felt normal. Until my older sister leaned back in her chair. She didn't look at me directly. She didn't have to. She stared past me like I was furniture and said with a soft laugh, "Some people just need to feel needed, even when they clearly aren't." The room didn't go silent. It did something worse. Forks slowed, voices thinned, eye contact disappeared. Everyone at that table knew she was talking about me, and everyone silently agreed to pretend she wasn't. I felt every glance land on my face without anyone daring to hold it for long. My mother's quick look, sharp and cautious, the corner of my sister's mouth curling upward just slightly. My grandfather's eyes stayed on his plate, but I knew better. He never missed anything. I had been the emergency contact for years. The extra paycheck, the quiet solution when things went wrong. They honestly believed I would swallow this too. Instead, I lifted my glass, smiled calmly, and said, "Perfect." Then I'm not. I set the glass down, reached into my bag, and opened the one app no one at that table ever thought I'd touch. 2 taps, 1 confirmation screen, and just like that, the account that had been quietly holding my sister's life together stopped. 5 minutes later, her expression changed. Her jaw actually dropped. My mother went pale in a way mascara couldn't hide. My grandfather finally looked up. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. On paper, what I did that night was simple. I stopped paying for something I never should have been paying for in the first place. In real life, it took years to get there. I am the younger sister by 3 years. My sister, Jocelyn Whitaker, was always the center of my mother's universe. Even when we were kids, it showed up in small ways. Who got new shoes? Who got the last piece of dessert? Whose excuses were forgiven? As adults, those small differences became expensive. Instead of extra cookies, Jocelyn got extra chances. Instead of apologies, I was expected to provide solutions. My mother, Deborah Whitaker, likes to say she raised us with very little. What she really means is that she still believes survival depends on keeping everyone happy. She talks about loyalty like it's the same thing as obedience. She wraps guilt in concern. And if that doesn't work, she reminds you how tired she is, how much she sacrificed, how ungrateful it would be to say no. Her husband, Andrew Parker, entered the picture a few years ago. He isn't cruel. He isn't loud. He's the kind of man who floats. He stays in situations he can't afford or doesn't enjoy, as long as someone else keeps the consequences away. With my family, that someone was always me. When my sister had her first child, the conversation sounded reasonable. Daycare was expensive. They were behind on bills. My mother called, then texted, then called again. She never directly asked me to pay. She just painted a picture of my niece's future as if it depended entirely on me. By the time the second child needed the same preschool, it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a system. I set up the automatic payment once. I told myself it was temporary. 3 months, maybe 4. Months turned into years. Every first business day, the tuition drafted from my account like clockwork. Every time I saw it, a little note reminded me whose kids I was paying for. It hurt, but it was easier than the late-night calls, easier than my mother's shaking voice describing worst-case scenarios until I caved. No one ever said, "You owe us." They didn't have to. When I got back home from Indiana, my apartment felt heavier than usual. Quiet, but not peaceful. The first call from my mother came before I even finished the drive. I let it ring. The second one too. By the time I parked, there were texts waiting, long ones. I didn't open them. I already knew the rhythm. Concern first, pressure next, guilt at the end. The next morning, my sister texted. She didn't bother with greetings. She accused me of humiliating her, of blindsiding her, of taking things out on her children. According to her, my boundary wasn't a boundary, it was an attack. An hour later, she followed up with a shorter message. "You're not really going through with this." No question mark, just certainty. The first voicemail I listened to wasn't from either of them. It was from my grandfather. His voice was slower than I remembered, but steady. He said he had watched things pile onto my shoulders for a long time, and sometimes the only way people learn to stand is when the ground stops feeling so safe. That night, I finally replied to my mother. I told her I wasn't changing my mind, that I had helped longer than I ever promised, that it was time for them to make another plan. She responded immediately. She called me cold, said money had hardened my heart, said she didn't raise me this way. For the first time, I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I put the phone face down and let the silence exist. 2 days later, my sister escalated things. She posted in the family group chat about people forgetting where they came from, about relatives who help without needing credit. She didn't use my name, but she didn't need to. Then my grandfather replied with a single sentence, "Sometimes loving your family means letting them learn on their own." The chat went silent. That Thursday, my sister texted again, "We need to talk, in person." She chose the place immediately, a parking lot across from her children's preschool. The perfect backdrop, the sound of kids playing, parents picking up backpacks and artwork, every emotional prop ready. She didn't waste time. "You humiliated me," she said. "Do you know what happens if that payment doesn't go through?" I told her calmly that her children were her responsibility, not mine. She stared at me like I had spoken another language. "You can afford it," she said. "You don't even have kids. What are you hoarding money for?" That line had been waiting years to come out. I told her I wasn't hoarding anything. I was paying for my own life, and that was enough. She shook her head. "I don't even recognize you." I didn't say what I was thinking, that for the first time in years, I recognized myself. The following week, the consequences arrived quietly. An email from the preschool landed in my inbox. Outstanding balance, late fee, possible loss of enrollment. My name was still listed as the billing contact. I forwarded it to my sister and my mother with one line, "This isn't mine anymore." The director called me later that day. I told her I was no longer responsible. She thanked me and said they'd contact the parents directly. That evening, my sister called, furious. "They called me at work," she said. "Do you know how that looks?" I told her it probably felt like watching money leave your account every month and hoping nothing else bounced. She didn't respond. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, but it was honest. I didn't abandon my family. I abandoned the role they forced me into, and for the first time in my life, I chose myself. I didn't abandon my family. I abandoned the role they forced me into. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more real stories about boundaries and self-respect.